been taking my time. I feel like I'm out of my mind. It feel like my life ain't mine. I've been on the low, I've been taking my time. I feel like I'm out of my mind. It feel like my life ain't mine.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Project Mayday. These are your hosts G and Bree, and today we have Karen Obar. So Karen holds a very dear place in my heart because she worked in the same county that I worked in, and she also holds a very dear space in Bree's heart because she was a part of her bachelorette party, and we're going to hear all about that. Can't wait. However, what we're here to talk about is Karen being a paramedic and ultimately retiring after 5 years. She was involved in a critical call that not many of us get. Mm-hmm. And so what she was told after the call is absolutely what we're going to dive into. And Karen, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, Bree, go ahead.
All right, Karen. So let's talk about how did you end up in going into EMS in the medical field?
So my family is nurses, paramedics. My cousin's an EMT, or he's a medic now, but firefighter, EMT. So it just kind of was in my family. And I went to nursing school with my mom. At that time, you could take your kids to school with you. So I was about 6 years old. And always trying to look at like the cadavers and all of her books. And she was always trying to hide it and give me coloring. And I would find the books. And so I think I was just destined to get into the medical field. And I never really thought twice about not doing it.
Mm.
So you started out at 18 years old. Can you talk about starting out at 18?
So my high school had ROP program for getting your firefighter 1 as well as your EMT. So I just thought it would be fun to take those classes and decided to do it. And so by the time I graduated, I had my EMT cert already, and then pretty much I had all my training for my firefighter 1. I just had to do the 6 months paid, or it's a year volunteer to finish that one up. So I ended up actually graduating and then starting to work for a little hospital there as an ER tech at 18. And I was the youngest. I think I still am the youngest ER tech that they've ever hired. I don't know if it's good or a bad thing for me.
Well, knowing you is definitely a good thing. Definitely a good thing. So, transition into now going into medic school, advancing your career from EMT to paramedic, and that's where you met the lovely Bree. And so, explain that. Was Bree one of those mean girls that didn't talk to you in class, or give us a little lowdown on Bree.
So actually, I was intimidated by Bree because she had her little cohort of Kelseyville Fire, and here I was just an EMT with a BLS critical care transport company. Plus, I'm an introvert, so I would just sit by myself at breaks. And I think it took about a week, and Bree came and sat next to me and said, "Hey, you want to be friends?" or something really funny like that. And I mean, we were like older. I mean, it's not like we were like kids. So it was funny. It was like, my friend. I'm like, yeah.
Yeah. Can we trade things in our lunches? Or
That's
so
awesome.
They adopted me, and then we competed for top grades and all that.
Who won?
I think Bree did, actually.
That's
right. And I currently teach, so that's right. You have to be good in your studies, G. Okay. So after paramedic school, you started working in Fresno as a medic. Can you explain the system in Fresno for those who are unaware of that city?
So as far as Fresno, besides Selma, which is part of Fresno County, you're the only paramedic. So there's no paramedics on the fire engine. So when you're running a call, everyone's an EMT, and then usually you're the only medic on the call unless a supervisor shows up at some point.
And when would a supervisor show up?
They go on codes or really high kind of profile calls. But also it's not every code. There was, as I was leaving, they started having the automatic CPR, and only the supervisors carried those. So they did start responding to every single code. But a lot of the times, it was more like MCIs or just really high profile kind of calls like that.
Yeah.
Or they were bored.
No, and like I said, I know where you were because I worked there for a little bit, and so I know where you were at as far as your station or what. I mean, you were in the boonies kind of thing, and so talk about that. You know, you were a medic for 3 years until you had this incident, this one particular call. Were you comfortable with being a medic at that point? I mean, Fresno is a very, very busy system. I mean, I attribute I hope I'm a good medic, but all the things that I've learned was from Fresno, for sure. And so, talk about that a little bit. Talk about, were you comfortable at the point when you ran that call?
Yeah. You know, even I did my internship in Fresno also because I wanted to make sure that I could handle being a medic, because earlier, I had been told by a medic when I was around 18, 19, I could never make it as a medic. I was too nice. I didn't have the right personality. Go be a nurse, you know. And so when I did decide to become a medic, I wanted to make sure I could handle it. So I did choose to intern, and I had pretty much every single type of call during my internship. And if it wasn't during my internship, it was during when I got rehired and had to do my 5 call. So I had, you know, PEEP codes, I had an MCI shooting, I've had, you know, MCI car accidents. I had pretty much had every single type of call. So even if I did get kind of nervous on the way to a call, I'd be like, I've been through pretty much every scenario. Mm-hmm. I had a guy like who caught himself on fire and was running down the street and we had to chase him. You know, It just really
that sounds
random.
About Fresno.
Really random. So by the time I was at the station I was at, it wasn't as busy of a 24-hour station as some of the other ones. So yeah, I was pretty comfortable by then.
Gotcha.
And I knew I could handle it.
And then, so, you know, now this call happens, and you know, you say you've had all this experience, and this call hits. So walk us through that day, walk us through getting that call. Because, you know, when we get something like that, when we're going to it, I mean, I don't know about Bree, but for myself, I'm like, it's probably not as bad as it is. So was that going through your mind, or like, where were you at?
Yeah, the funny thing is I don't remember. I remember the call like it was yesterday, but I don't remember much of the day. I don't think it had been a very busy day, and I was working with, she's now one of my best friends. So we usually worked our 24 hours together, and we got called out. I remember the sun had gone down. It was cold, and it wasn't too far from our station. But usually fire did beat us there, but it was on a county line, which kind of made it hard for them to figure out which engine to send. So we got on scene within, I think it was a minute and a half, and we were first on scene. And there was a SUV fully inflamed and a guy screaming, and then there was the other car and someone outside of the car. So that was kind of as we drove up, what I was seeing. And of course, I'm looking around, we're firefighters, you know, There's a fire. I don't know what to do.
Right. So you're showing up on scene. It's already very chaotic, and someone's running around yelling. Were they yelling at you?
Yeah. So we get out of the ambulance, and this guy comes running up, screaming, saying his entire family is in the car that was fully engulfed. And at first he was so hysterical, I couldn't understand what he was saying. And I'm zoned in on, because we had pretty much pulled up right next to the other vehicle where the female was already laying on the ground. And so I go to her right away. And at that point, it's just me and my partner still. I remember and then he's just yelling, my family. And I'm like, they're still in the vehicle. And he's like, yeah, you know, and he just starts screaming, like, you don't even care about my family. It's your fault. They're dying, like just screaming at me. And right then I felt a tap on my shoulder because I didn't know how. I was trying to focus on the one person I did have. And luckily it was one of the volunteers, and he showed up, and we're still super close to this day because of that call. He showed up, and he was, you know, like, what can I do to help? And then fire started rolling up, and he was able to kind of help direct fire with what was going on as I focused on the one patient that I could save at that point.
Good.
So the car is fully involved, and there was just no way to access any of those patients that you didn't even know were in the car.
Correct. So it turns out the guy on scene was the father and husband, and he had been following them. They were coming home from a birthday party. The one patient still alive on scene had ran a stop sign, and so he had tried to go right, and it was already engulfed. He had burns all over his hands from trying to get in there, which I didn't know until later. But that shows me, you know, first of all, he was right there and he couldn't get to them. But for me, it was hard as soon as I found out there was kids in the car, and I'm talking 5 kids, and then his wife. And the way it was, the vehicle, one of the SUVs was going this way, and it was almost like a T-bone where hers was. And things were exploding. I could feel the heat, and we're trying to get her to, get her to safety to our ambulance. And so even just right there, we're ducking down as, you know, we hear explosions. I don't know what's exploding. I don't know much about fire, even though I'd gone through training long time ago. So that was, and then while I'm trying to take care of her, I was just thinking, is there anything I can, I can't do anything. There's nothing, you know, and just that kind of I'm just sitting here watching this entire firm family burn to death, you know, and having him scream at me saying it's our fault. And then it even got worse because then he started trying to attack her, my patient. And so we ended up loading her. We're trying to get a helicopter for her. We loaded her, locked all the doors, waiting for SO to get there. And they're banging on the ambulance, screaming. I'm trying to just focus on the patient. And turns out he had called up a whole bunch of people. He was a former gang member. All his friends showed up. So it ended up being a really unsecure scene on top of it, where they had to shut everything down in that whole area, and lots of police presence. And
and you know, that's a once in a lifetime call, right? And I'm sure, you know, I've had a family in a vehicle burning, but not to the magnitude of what you're describing. So, you know, you have a family that's burning, you have the dad that's outside screaming, and then you add on the patient from the other vehicle, and then you add on the whole gang kind of scenario, and then you're in the back of the ambulance with the one that they don't like right now. And, you know, all of that added on, and then also something interesting, you know, talking to you about this before, was the supervisor shows up. And, you know, when the supervisor shows up, what happens?
So actually the initial supervisor who showed up on scene, she was the swing supervisor. She was great. She, by then, because they had to come from Fresno. So it was about a 30-minute code 3 drive for the supervisor to get to me. So by then the chaos had settled down somewhat. She was great. The one on scene was great. It was after the call, we did debrief with the fire department, and that, I think, saved me in the end, because I was just kind of numb through the whole debriefing. And kind of at that point, I still wasn't even aware I was traumatized by anything. I was just kind of standing there like, oh, it's cold, you know, and, you know, and even some of the firefighters were like, I could see tears in their eyes, and I just didn't say anything the entire time. And finally, one of them turns to me and says, is there anything you want to ask? And I said, the only thing is, if you guys had gotten here first, would it have turned out different? Is there anything different I could have done? And they said, no. Even if we had witnessed this, the way it went up in flames, all that, they're like, it would have not made a difference. So that, I think, I'm so glad that they chose to ask me, because I wasn't someone who would speak up. And that really helped me with a little bit of a sense of, okay, I did do everything I could, even through all this chaos. So anyways, I was leaving the scene. We were wrapping up the call. My supervisor said, hey, you know, you need anything? I'm like, no, I'm good. And so we head back to the station, and I noticed my partner, who I had been working, we worked usually 24 hours to 36 hours straight together. So I noticed her kind of being off. And so I kept focusing. I'm like, are you okay? You want to talk about it? Like this and that. And she was just like, I don't know, because I had to go over and look in the car. And she's like, I couldn't even walk over there and look. How are you doing? Because you had to look in the car. And I was like, I don't know. And so then after that, we were back at the station, like 20 minutes, we get another call. And so we go on this call, and it wasn't even, I think it was like a chest pain, something pretty routine. But when I was running that call, I was like, I just don't want to make any of these decisions. I think the person was wanting to like sign out AMA. And I was like, I don't want to have any responsibility right now. I can't use my mind. I'm exhausted mentally, physically. And I was just really anxious that even just running a chest pain call, which we run like 1 million a day. And so we got back to the station, and then we got another call, and it was just for like a sick person. But once again, by that time I was just shaking. I didn't know I didn't know what was happening to me, because I had many traumatic calls in the past, not to this extent, but I've had hard calls, and I just physically thought I was sick, or I just needed some sleep, because it was turning into a busy night. And so I called my supervisor. By then, the one that was on the call with me was gone. So my supervisor said, and I explained what happened. He goes, well, so? He's like, that's your job. And I was like, okay. I was like, but I don't feel like I can. And he's like, I said, I don't feel like I can make these decisions right now. I don't feel good, And he's like, okay, so what you're saying is you're sick. You need to go home sick. I was like, okay, if that's what I need to say to leave, then yes, I need to go home sick. And my partner does too. And he was just kind of like, okay, well, I'll get coverage. Just leave then. And I was like, okay. Didn't think anything of it. The next day I woke up with my first like severe panic attack. I was supposed to go to work for my 12-hour. So I had the severe panic attack, and I was like, okay, I just need to take a couple days off. I have 4 days to recoup. We'll be fine. So I called in sick the next day. And then when I returned to work the following week, it turns out he had been going around telling other crew members that I wasn't cut out to be a medic, that if I can't handle these type of calls, that I'm in the wrong field, and just really bashing my name, bashing who I was. And it was just really, so it's like, not only was EMS had that mentality anyways, and so I already kind of felt bad about calling in and thinking I wasn't strong because I couldn't handle this call. But on top of it, you had someone that was supposed to be your superior going around like gossiping. And that for me was just really hard. And he, it seemed like he really had it out for me until he ended up leaving the company. He made my life literal hell from that. So,
Karen, there's so many things here to look at, but I think it's really important to focus is that you had an initial injury, right? You had an acute stress response. You're in shock. Processing death anyway, when you emotionally connect to it, is hard, right? And that's something we are not taught on how to cope with typically. We weren't, in our paramedic school, they didn't talk about this. It was, how do you read an EKG? How do you start an IV? Here's the monkey skills. It was never, hey, when you come on scene of a critical incident where it's really sad and emotionally driven, this is what you need to do. Here's a protocol. You need to go home, right? Yeah. Or you need to find your people, or you need to have a peer support group, whatever it is. So you had your initial acute stress, and then you had a secondary injury. I mean, truly, because then you are already questioning everything. And now you're talking about, well, now I have to defend what I don't even understand is happening, right? That it's like, I guess I'm physically ill, because we don't talk about mental wellness as part of medicine, right? Yeah. When we call psychiatric patients psychs, right? We downplay their experience to protect us, right? Yeah. But when we call each other things like this in the field, we're supposed to be a community seeing the worst things on people's worst days, and then we're telling them to suck it up, which is what happened.
Yeah. and like, I mean, you're getting emotional now about it, and you know, I can tell it's still with you. Just, I mean, hopefully you know that when he went to medical school, he was in a different era. And I know exactly who you're talking about as far as the supervisor goes, and you know, he was in a different era. So don't. I mean, I'm sure you've had your bouts with it, but don't let that. Understand where he's coming from as far as his era. You know, we're in a different era now, and we take mental health very seriously now. Hence
why we have our podcast.
Yeah.
So you sharing your story just about this highlights that you are already a seasoned medic. I mean, 3 years in a busy system is like 6 years in a slow system, right? Your standard chest pain call, your standard heart attack. I mean, this was out of the norm. And honestly, like G was saying, I mean, this is a once in a lifetime or once in a career call, right? If we as first responders had to go to these types of calls all the time, nobody would make it, right? So, and especially because there were so many children, young children, a mother. I mean, it had every single dynamic of causing PTSD. Yeah. Especially because you, as the paramedic, you were the only paramedic, and you're supposed to be making all of the medical decisions with that license. So there's a lot of responsibility. So I think too, processing all that after a call and declaring, you know, the 1144s or the 1055s or whatever it is, right? You're declaring them dead. You know, when you do that, you also take on that responsibility. And so you were there with the BLS fire department, a supervisor that initially supported you, and then you couldn't figure out why you didn't want to stay for the rest of your shift. When in reality, your supervisor should have recognized you probably should have gone home.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And then, you know, kind of transitioning after the call, you stayed for another 2 years.
Yeah.
You know, you know, I'm sure there was a lot of back and forth about leaving and whatnot, but you kind of stuck it out, so to speak. Yeah. So why did you stick it out? Mm-hmm. Let's talk about that space that, you mean, it was 3 years in, you were a medic, and then that call happened, and then you stuck it out for another 2 years. How was those 2 years like?
You know, the follow after that supervisor there, I'm not sure the whole story behind him, if he was fired or he left on his own accord. But the atmosphere started changing as far as EMS in general. Like you said, the supervisor came from, and we kind of came into it at the end of that. You suck it up. You're one of the guys. You don't show emotion. That was just how the medical field was. Mm-hmm. You sink or swim. They eat their young. You deal with it. You don't complain. You don't show emotion. After that, the next couple years, the company I worked for did start like a peer mentorship program. They started doing debriefings after these large incidents. So things were starting to change, and I did notice it. And my whole reason, people used to always ask, how can you be a paramedic? How can you do this job? And I said, these things are going to happen anyways, and I feel like I was born to do this. You know, a lot of the times I wasn't ever a really hyper emotional person, even though I'm an introvert. A lot of stuff I was able to just kind of brush off, or it would just affect me for that shift. And so with this call, that's what I did. I took my 4 or 5 days, whatever it was, pushed it deep down with everything else that I had ever seen, and continued on. And the only reason I knew it had affected me a little bit was because it took a couple days for me to move on, which turns out I didn't move on. Yeah. I didn't know that until hormones from babies.
You know, and you say, you know, 4 or 5 days after the incident, you had your 4 or 5 days. It's like, no, like we need more than that.
Yeah.
We need a month, if not more, you know,
an intervention.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And that's not the norm yet. And we're getting there. So wow, I just, I mean, you describing that call just now, I mean, runs chills up my spine. And, you know, so now let's talk about the post-traumatic growth side of it, right? And how is that now? I mean, I know you've left the field and now you're going into a brand new field with, you know, respiratory therapy. Describe the transition.
So actually it was a really hard transition because I wasn't 100% ready to not be a medic anymore. I did fracture my back, which ended things early. I had already started going back to school for prereqs, knowing that I wasn't going to be a lifelong medic like I thought I was going to be. So that was hard for me. But at that time also, I was getting married, and then I had a baby, and I ended up with postpartum depression and anxiety. And it wasn't until I got that diagnosis, and that just, that led to a really, really the darkest time of my life, suicidal ideation, to the point where, looking back, I should have been hospitalized. It was really bad. But it wasn't until I was following my family. Everyone was in the car. I was following them in my truck. We were going on vacation, and I had a panic attack while I was driving. I just kept imagining watching what that father had gone through. And I had to get ahead of them, just drive on my own. I still have issues to this day. If my husband takes the kids somewhere, it's something I do have to fight off. I've been to a lot of therapy, medication, and just the whole nature that, like, this podcast, how people are starting to speak about it and realizing I'm not weak. I'm not all those things that people had said to me as I was going into this field. It's okay to have emotion. It's okay to get help. So I was able to spend about 3 years, actually, it took me to kind of get back on track immensely, to the point where I was like, okay, I can handle to stay in the medical field because it's something I love. And as RT, I don't think I could go back to being a first responder and seeing the worst of the worst. At least I'm a little bit sheltered in that sense. As far as rolling up on the 1144s, stuff like that. I don't have to see that anymore.
Gotcha. So. And as you're talking about that call and about your growth, you're still we can tell that you're still holding on to stuff. And at that call, how do you when now those emotions spark up now? How are you able to deal with them now than at the time when they was all going on, or those 2 years after the call? How are you able to deal with them now a little bit different, because there's somebody watching right now that just had that call. So maybe coach them a little bit, talk to that person, and what do you have to say about it?
So definitely reach out to. There should be some, especially nowadays. I think there's a peer mentor group within your company. There's usually the debriefing. You can even request for that. Going from there, therapy, and I know we're all pretty resistant to trying that, but talking about it really does help, because what I did was just shut it down internally for a long time on top of all those other calls. And it just came to a boiling point where no human can deal with all that. No one is Iron Man. We all do have emotions down there somewhere, even if we're not the overly emotional type.
Except for Brie.
So, yeah.
Story.
So, yeah, you just, the sooner you can open up about it, the better, because then you won't be like me. It's been 7 years and I still only talked about it a few times. And so it's still hard for me to talk about, and I don't open up a lot about it. Yeah. But it's definitely, it's impacted my life. And maybe if I had gotten earlier intervention, that I wouldn't have struggled as hard and went as deep as I did.
Yeah. And you say you've held it in for 7 years. Like that is a crazy amount of time to hold something in like that. And we appreciate you coming on and sharing, that particular, call, which gets you emotional. Absolutely. So we absolutely appreciate that. And now on to some fun stuff. Yes. So we're going to get you on the hot seat now. All right. It's called Rapid Fire. So rapid fire is 5 questions, and you have to answer in one word or one phrase. All right.
Okay.
You get all right. Okay. All right. So Bree will take over, and they're fun, and maybe 1 or 2 are serious, but you'll like the first one. Is it the first one? Yeah, it's the first one. You like the first. I thought of the first one.
Okay. All right. So, how do you feel now that it's 2021 that your name is Karen?
I think it's hilarious. I look for the best memes. Oh, hilarious.
Yeah.
One word.
Yeah, are you a Karen?
No.
That was a side follow-up, not one of the five. Not one of the five.
Okay, question 2. What's one thing you miss about being a paramedic?
Camaraderie.
Third question. If you were a ruler of your own country, what would be the first law you would introduce?
Oh my gosh. Be kind.
Everyone has to be nice. Be nice.
Be nice.
Okay, if you could have any exotic animal as a pet, what would you choose?
Monkey.
Okay. All right.
And last question. What is one word to describe yourself?
Resilient.
Ooh, I like that word. Absolutely. Resilient for sure. I mean, based off that call and that story, you are absolutely resilient, Karen. And we appreciate you coming on, your strength and telling that story and owning it, not letting it own you now. Owning it is absolutely transformative. And hopefully, somebody listening out there absolutely takes that in and then owns that story for themselves. So thank you so much for coming on, Karen. And this is Project Mayday. Call out.
Bye.